people think, well, a square peg in the round hole, that means that the person is wrong. Well, the problem is when you shove a square peg into a round hole, not only does the peg get hurt, but the hole gets hurt.
Hello and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We are here to talk about business, but we want to tackle those topics that most business leaders tend to shy away from. And we believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. I'm your host, Jeff Ma. And as always, I'm looking to have conversations and hear stories from people in the real world, talking about real businesses and real approaches. And today, I'm joined by Michael Yinger. He's the co-founder and CEO of Resume Sieve, an HR tech startup. And he's a high-performance, forward-thinking executive with 20 plus years of experience in building teams, managing global organizations, and providing strategic guidance to C-suites, boards of directors, and so on and so forth. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Jeff. Happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I always give that formal on paper intro, and then I'm like, okay, but who are you really? So fill in the blanks for me. Michael, who are you? Who's Michael Yinger?
Yeah, well, that could be a long conversation. Just in general, I've been in talent acquisition for a number of years, and before that, I was in technology consulting, and before that, I was in transportation. I actually drove ships, mostly in the Pacific, but in some other places. So I've had a pretty varied and exciting career, I think, up till now. Maybe 3 or 4 different facets to it, but it's been one of opportunity, and I've enjoyed myself as I've done what I've done.
That's awesome. I know specifically, though, more recently, obviously, you're in the HR space, we're talking talent acquisition
Yes.
and recruitment and things like that. And that is always a topic that perks my ears up because, especially in my line of work and what we talk about here every week, that's a big deal. I mean, it's a big factor, a big how we approach or anyone approaches that is critical to building a culture of love or a culture, whatever culture you're deeming or trying to have. And it's often overlooked, or people are trying to fix what they have, but they don't always look at how to get in and retain the talent that they need. So,
Well, yeah, it's as you say, it's a huge topic there, and there's a lot of work that can be done, and some work that people are doing, but it is so critical in particularly now where people have choices.
yeah, sure, that seems to be the theme going
Yes.
around. So I'm curious, before we dive into that specific piece, where does your passion, or I guess where does your drive come from when it comes to HR, recruiting, and things like that?
What attracted me to the space is, frankly, it's the variety of things that you get to deal with. I had been doing consulting, and one of the hallmarks of consulting typically is you get to do a variety of things, different kinds of projects, different clients. It ends, you get to start another one. And particularly the area that I've been in, recruitment process outsourcing predominantly, that's exactly what it's like. You've got different clients, they have different needs. You're searching for different kind of things. There are things that are working for them, there's not. So there's a lot of variety, and that keeps me excited. There have been times where I'll go months and months and not do the same thing twice from one day to the next. And
Yeah.
some people, they're not wild about that, but I like the variety. I like the challenge of having to think through a situation that maybe you haven't had to deal with before, and that's been very exciting for me.
What is can you describe a little bit what Resume Sieve does, or
Sure.
how that works?
We have a product suite at the front end of the recruiting funnel. We have a tool that evaluates and ranks resumes. It's intended to add productivity, compliance, repeatability to the process of evaluating the candidates, particularly in situations where you're getting, more than a couple. If you're getting 10, 20, 50, you want to be able to look at them all in the same way. Resumes are all written differently. People put different things in when they apply to the job. We make it easy for the recruiter to do a fair analysis of the candidates they've got before they move on to the next step of interviewing.
Got it. That makes sense. That seems really helpful. I could have used that a
Yeah,
couple of
yeah,
years
yeah,
ago.
yeah. We think it's helpful, and we're getting some response, and so looking forward to growing the company.
I think more and more companies they're looking for what I would call a culture add, not just a culture fit, but a culture add to their organization. Some people to help them become more than what they currently are, and not just fit into a mold. I think some organizations are starting to see that. Some are not. Obviously, some are still on the other end of that. But how do you view that? Where are you on that conversation of finding those people? What kind of approaches there are for that?
Well, I come from the perspective that I'm responsible for the culture as a member of the team, as a member of the organization. So how I act, how I interact are elements of that culture. And so I think it's an interesting exercise, although a difficult challenge, to hire people based on their cultural fit. Sure, there are assessments that you can do and things like that. But most often, you need to find somebody who can do the job. You need to be able to communicate what your culture is like so that people can make informed choices around where they are going in the future. I question whether people can really do a good job figuring out how I am going to impact their culture. That's I haven't seen I haven't seen a lot of writing on that. I understand the concept. It seems to me in a way of abdicating the responsibility for creating the culture that you want, maintaining the culture that you want, making that available to people so they can make the choice to be a part of it.
So, what have you found to be the best way to even get close or assess that even up front?
Yeah. Well, certainly there are questions that you can weave into your interview around activities that people have done. There are some assessments which look at things like, disc analysis, for example. You can look at the kind of person that you're getting, and there are people who add that to their recruiting process. And it's like anything else. Recruiting is dating, and
Mhm.
so people are thinking about, how do I answer that question? The whole thing about a lot of those assessments is, do them as honestly as possible. Well, yeah, but I want this job. Why? How do they want me to answer the question? How am I going to
Yeah.
fit into the organization? So there's a little bit of tendency to skew it. I would say that it adds a significant level of complexity to the recruiting process because one, you have to find the right vehicle that is assessing what you want to look at, and then two, you have to include that in your evaluation process, which means that your recruiting team has to know how to use those tools, use the outcome of those tools. So it's an interesting challenge, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that we practice in our recruiting is that we have our recruiters basically become the candidate's best friend, or basically their biggest advocate, in the sense of, if you're about to meet with, the CEO or VP or whatever, you go ahead and tell them all the tips and secrets. Like, the CEO likes this, doesn't like that. They tend to do this or have joke about this in all these little ways, like an inside kind of best friend on the inside. And the reason we do that is so that when the candidate comes, and if they didn't use any of that information, first of all, if they did, then great, because there's a way to see how we connect, see how they relate to those
Yep.
things, and
Yep.
I think a lot of recruitment processes focus on putting people under like negative pressure, or kind of seeing how you deal with the hardships and things like that. And
Sure.
a lot of times we're looking for people to be set up for success. And how do you perform when you're given the tools? Because then you understand how coachable they are, or how how well they listen, essentially, and how well they want to kind of work with the team and involve themselves. Uh, that's an approach we took. What do you think of that? Are we doing that right?
There are two aspects of that I really like. The first is, inherently what you're doing is you're working to build rapport and connection with the candidate. And in today's market, I've worked with some recruiting companies where their entire focus is on the relationship between the recruiter and the candidates. Candidates have choices, and you want to be the company that they want to go to, and so that's the first step in that. The second step is, and you basically said this, you give people pointers. One, it tells them a little bit about the culture, but two, you're giving them the chance to use or not use this data, and what they choose to do tells you about, well, are they coachable?
Mhm.
Are they going to fit because they understand what those things mean? So I working anything you can do to work with the candidate, and I like the concept of on a positive basis. The negative reinforcement. How many ping pong balls can you put in a 747? Right? All those crazy kind of things. Or you're in a blender and you're only 5 inches tall, and how do you get out?
I've had
Whatever.
all of those, yes.
All those things. Stress inducing. Well, that tells you a lot about the organization. So I think your process is telling the candidate about the organization, and it goes back to what I'd said originally. The candidate gets to make the choice of whether they fit in the organization. You're going to get some pointers too, and it's helping them understand what they're getting into. If they don't like, to be able to touch and feel and be part of the organization, well, then you may not be the company for them to work for. So I think that's it. It's more time consuming, I bet you,
Mhm.
and it's the candidate touch is usually what distinguishes a good candidate experience, a good recruiting process from one that isn't, because so much today, recruiting today is so overwhelmed with all the resignations, all the replacements, all the number of people applying to jobs to get back to work, that they're not dealing with the candidates. I talked to one executive who applied to 300 jobs, got 10 negative responses and one interview after 300 applications. Not even to tell you, forget it, you don't fit, or we didn't really look at you, but we looked at somebody. I mean, any kind of thing that tells me you care about your candidates, and candidates are going to understand that. Now, some may not choose to join. That's a different issue, and people want to know that you care about them when they have choices. That can be a deciding factor.
Absolutely. That's one of our guiding principles, I think, in our organization
Yeah.
is that people need to feel welcome. People need to feel like they belong and that they're wanted there as a high level. I want to ask you, I guess, almost a bit of a zoom out since you just mentioned it. What is your take on, the current situation of the job market in general? Obviously, you mentioned the Great Resignation, but where do you see us now as as employment is rapidly kind of evolving, changing what people want,
Mm.
and where do you see it going?
Well, there are a couple of aspects of that. The first is just sort of the market activity. The with the change in the way people think about the job, with the Great Resignation, with the mismatch, but still significant mismatch between the number of jobs available and the number of people who are available to take those jobs. There's still it's still a buyer's market, right? It's a candidate's market, and then you add to that some of the cultural changes which appear to be sticking, of people wanting certain things out of the organization. Just give you one example, and this isn't intended to be political, but there was an announcement last week that they changed the back to work policy for Virginia state government workers.
Mhm.
300 people quit. Those that indicated why they quit, all of them quit because of the back to work policy. They wanted to
Sure.
be able to continue to have their flexibility. So
Yeah.
we'll see how those things sort out, but I think that those things are here to stay, and organizationally, we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to be prepared for, can we work in a hybrid situation? Elon Musk made an announcement that raised a lot of noise, that everybody has to come back to the office. Well, it wasn't exactly what he said. What he said was, everybody who's in our factories has to go to work every day at the factory, because that's the nature of factory work. Anybody who supports the factory should have to work the same way they do and be in the office. That's not everybody in the organization, but that's what people heard.
Mhm.
How are you communicating, and are you asking your folks what works for them or what doesn't? I was talking to a CEO who took advantage of the real estate market during COVID, and bought a new facility and refurbished it, and then and announced to her team, okay, we're back to work. And they said, no, we're not. I moved. I don't live in North Carolina anymore. I live in Virginia.
Yeah.
I like being at home because I can take care of my kids. I'm doing my job. I've been doing my job for 2 years. I'm not coming back to the office. And this woman was beside herself because she'd gone out and done the real estate thing. She didn't ask anybody. She didn't check with what was going on with her team. That's where you run into problems. A lot of this stuff is around communications and understanding what it is that motivates your team. Because not everybody, some people like working in the office, and some people will fit back into that. It's being open to that conversation and listening to what people are telling you. And all too often, we do, we management, we do a lot of telling. We don't do a lot of listening.
I love the way you put that. You're talking specifically about this environment we're all working in and dealing with, but what you said kind of resonated to me, like as a whole, whether you're talking about
Yeah.
recruitment or anything at all, like leaders in general are now more than ever, but always should have been practicing listening whenever possible. And I think we've always preached that. So you're really resonating with me in what you're saying. When it comes to this level of empathy is how I kind of define what you're describing. Have you worked with, consulted, or coached people on how to do that better, like maybe more tactfully or specifically how to develop these listening skills or methods to do that?
I have. I did some work myself on personal empowerment and understanding what makes me tick. And so on an individual level, not on a consulting level, but on an individual level, people who've worked for me, it's being in the conversation around what is it that we are doing as an organization? What is it that you want to do as an individual? And how do you fit in there? What scares people often about that conversation is that they're going to hear something that says, well, we're a recruiting company, but this person wants to be a chef. Great. How can I help them be a chef?
Mhm.
Right? That's not a natural reaction. I would say most people, oh my God, I got to change their mind, or I don't want to know what they want to do. I just want them to do their job. And so my personal approach is one of conversation, and I said it's listening. It's not telling. One of my analogies that I use a lot is that um, I I've done well with the whole concept of a square peg in a round hole, meaning suiting so that someone fits even if they're not a perfect fit, because people think, well, a square peg in the round hole, that means that the person is wrong. Well, the problem is when you shove a square peg into a round hole, not only does the peg get hurt, but the hole gets hurt.
Mhm.
And so are you really thinking about how you're using your people? Are you open to putting someone where they fit, of recreating something that works for them? And it is a labor of love. It's a labor of often one at a time to make this happen. And I think that the end result is you have people who are A, happier, B, more productive, and C, begin to replicate that kind of thinking with their team. It's contagious. Particularly when you see the positive results that come from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. When you look at the world you work in, the things that you deal with, and you think of the word love, where
Mm.
is the first place you go? Where's your mind go right away?
First thing I think of is the concept of uh, sort of mutual self-respect, of appreciating what the other person has to offer or the organization has to offer. If you love your company, they're doing things which you really appreciate. If your coworker loves you, it's because you've synced. These are the kind of things I think about, that you've synced in a way that makes your working environment more positive. And it really is. It's a mindset. Are you open to the kind of feelings that come with that? Because it's, particularly in a work environment, I would say that in some ways we're conditioned to stay away from love because, ooh, what does that
Hmm.
mean? And am I now crossing some line or something else? It can be a balancing act, but it really speaks to connecting on an emotional level as opposed to just on a day-to-day work level.
Yeah. And in your experience, I'm assuming you've seen it all, right? I mean, organizations who do that well and do it
Yeah.
poorly. What to you are the signs or the hallmarks of both ends of that spectrum?
Well, some of them are pretty obvious. The organizations that aren't in the loving frame, the conversations are testier. They're more terse, perhaps. You don't see the big events, the working, doing things outside of work, and so you flip it the other way around. Organizations that really have demonstrated that they love their people and their people love them. They have great parties and they have great successes. They work through challenges as opposed to succumbing to them. And yeah, I certainly have seen examples of those across the spectrum. Ironically, sometimes the lack of loving organization just through sort of dictatorial activity can survive and can be successful, but it's tough. You have higher turnover. You have that whole stress thing that goes on with people. Those are pretty visible signs that you're not operating in this sort of mindset.
Yes. Sorry, I'm bouncing around quickly because I just have so much just different things to ask you.
Yeah, no worries.
wh- um, when it comes to, I guess, so we've been talking about kind of recruitment and, the candidates and the recruiters, but what about in like your own like organization in terms of, and not maybe your current one, but in the past, as you've worked with recruiters and with like within the walls of that HR space, like within the people who are responsible for
Mhm.
others' experiences and culture, things like that. Um, what kind of learnings do you have in terms of this, what we've been talking about there, like love and I'm just curious because that space is so unique. That space is where the burden of all these things fall on you, whether you're talking
Yeah.
about like DEI and all those things, or you're talking about just
Yeah.
just satisfaction within the walls of the organization. It's a lot to think about and work with. What does culture look like in that space to you?
Well, one of the things that we did, for many years, I was in charge of implementation. And so what that means is somebody would sell an outsourced recruiting opportunity, and I would be the one that was responsible for setting it up. And part of that was creating the training for the recruiters. Now, the recruiters need to know about your company if they're new hires. They also need to know about the client company, and that includes culture. And so what we would do in those kinds of situations is we would ask representatives of the organization to come and speak about the culture, and we would document that so that the recruiters understood what it was that they were putting forward. And I think it was a telling success in that there's an award every year. It's called the Candy Awards for the organizations that have the highest rated candidate experience. And we regularly had 4 or 5 companies who would win those awards. Now, the company won the award. We were the ones who were providing the service. So obviously there's a relationship there but we didn't take credit for it other than we would go and we'd have a party with the company that won the award and go with them to accept their award because
Mhm.
they have to be committed to delivering this kind of service. But it's education, it's training, and it's getting the recruiters inherently are communicators. Good recruiters, they understand that their job is to connect with the candidates and the hiring managers, and everything you can do to reinforce that relationship, to show them that this is about how you connect with the person, is really going to have an impact on what they think about the organization and whether or not they choose to join. So there's a lot of training that goes into it. There's no question. For one thing, you've got to be able to articulate what is your culture, what is it that you want people to understand about you, And a lot of organizations still, they might know what their brand is, but do they really understand what their culture is? It's not the words that are on the wall. It's
Oh
how
yeah.
people act, how people treat each other on a day-to-day basis. That's my point at the beginning, where I'm responsible for the culture that I'm living in. That's an interesting lesson for people to learn, because it's not necessarily intuitive. You can spend months creating a bunch of code words that talk about what your culture is. Do you live that? Is that really the way you are? Because some of those are really challenging. If you just think about the word in and of itself, accountability, honesty, transparency. Those are great words. Deliver on that. At what point don't you tell people what's going on? And there goes transparency out the window. I'm not saying it's not possible. There's a commitment to it. People have to be willing to work at it.
Ah, man, amazing. I love the way you said that. Speaking right to me. I mean, number of times I've seen organizations with the intention of adjusting, fixing, and improving culture release a whole new like Bible of values and mission
Yep.
statements. And day one, it does more damage than help because people's BS meter just kind of go off right away. And they're like, our new value is trust. And I don't trust a single person around me. It's like,
No.
what do you want me to do with this? Right.
Yeah, the first time they see someone acting against those values, why should I? Why should I play this game? Because my boss isn't, and his or her boss isn't. That's just, yeah. There's a commitment to it. There really is a commitment around the organization. What do you truly stand for, and how do you live that? That's the key. It's not the words.
Yeah,
It's the actions.
exactly. One thing we always kind of live by and also share with others is that like these values need to be clearly not just communicated, but they need to be communicated clearly that they are aspirational for the most part. Like you have to have a
Yeah.
level of vulnerability as an organization to say we're not there. And there's power in saying, here are values we want to be, here are some steps we want to take to get there, but we're not necessarily there. And it's like people can hear that and be like, fair. Like at least I get it. Like
Yep.
I hear you. We aren't perfect and that's okay. And people can rally behind that and even help and support rather than saying, here's our new values. You guys are going to love it. Look forward to amazing things. And it's like, but nothing has changed or none of these things mean anything if you're not kind of supporting us through a change.
Well, obviously there's a journey there, and people don't mind being on a journey as long as they know that it's a journey. What you said just resonates so much, that we just by fiat, okay, here are our new values. Well, what's the demonstrated proof that we're already living by those values? And often, particularly if it's a fundamental change, there won't be any proof because you haven't been living by those values, which is why you put the values in the first place.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff, it seems so intuitive, but everybody wants a shortcut. We got to have values. The board of directors says we need new values and we got to move forward. Okay, well,
Yeah.
the journey is as important as the summit, because there really is no summit with this
There's
stuff.
no
It's
summit.
I've been a hiker in a past life, not so much now, but in the past. And there's always another summit. There's always something higher. It's actually a tenet of Buddhism that you never reach the top. There's always something more, because you're constantly learning and evolving, and culture and values are the same way. And organizations that recognize that and call that out have an opportunity for people to get on board and all
Mhm.
row in the same direction. And organizations that don't, well, then you see what happens. It's just words on the wall.
Well, it feels like you've been speaking my language this entire episode. The time has flown by. But it's just been like just straight 25 minutes of you like saying exactly what I feel in my heart. So it's been it's been this refreshing moment of just hearing you articulate it so well. And Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time today to come and drop that wisdom, affirm some things for me, but definitely for the audience, share something to think about and some insights for them to take back, especially if they work in that space, but I think for everybody.
Well, Jeff, I enjoyed the conversation. It's the side of things you don't often get to talk about. So much of it's tactical or other things, but this is important because this is the stuff. You said it right at the beginning. This is the stuff that keeps people. This is retention, and if you're not thinking about this, then you're always going to be dealing with churn, and that's expensive.
Oh yeah.
This
Yeah.
pays for itself. If you stop and think about it for a moment, it just pays for itself.
Absolutely. So with that, Michael, thank you for all of your time. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this and other episodes. We come out with new ones every Wednesday. Please do check out the book if you haven't, Love as a Business Strategy. You can find it on Amazon, other places. Drop a review for that, this podcast, all those things. Tell a friend. With that, have a great week. Thank you again, Michael, and we will see you all next week.